What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes,
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
Good morning. Can I remind members of the COVID-related measures that are in place and that face coverings should be worn when moving around the chamber and across the Holyrood campus? The first item of business is general questions. In order to get in as many people as possible, I'd appreciate short and succinct questions and answers. And at question number 1, I call David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the next steps in collating Scotland's census data.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's Census Day was Sunday the 20th of March, and I'm pleased to say that census returns are currently in line with our expected targets. I'd like to thank everyone who's so far taken the time to participate. The aim of the census is to deliver a set of questions and associated guidance that enables all of Scotland's people to access, to understand and to complete the census. Every household in Scotland has a legal obligation to complete a census return, and the National Registers of Scotland have ensured that people are able to access a range of help and support to help them do so.
David Torrance.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Although Census Day was on Sunday, would the Cabinet Secretary like to take this opportunity to highlight the importance of completing the census, and can the Cabinet Secretary outline what scope there is for those who have not responded yet to send back returns now that Census Day has passed?
Cabinet Secretary.
Scotland's Census 2022 is the official count of every person and household in the country, and the only questionnaire of its kind to ask everybody the same questions at the same time. And we've relied on this information from censuses for more than 200 years. It remains the best way to gather vital information for government councils, the NHS and a range of users in the public, private and third sectors. There's still time to submit, and while Census Day was last Sunday, the National Register of Scotland are still accepting submissions. Reports available to all households to help complete their census online or via a free helpline. For those who would need the number, it's 0800 030 8308.
Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, there were difficulties across my region with individuals who were struggling to get paper copies. Can I ask what assessment has been done to ensure that they did receive their paper copies on time, and if they haven't, what outcomes are expected from that?
Cabinet Secretary.
The feedback I've had from the work of the contact centre, which is where people call to secure a written census questionnaire, has been working well. As with any large-scale operations, more than 1.2 million households in Scotland, there will be always cases of administrative shortcomings. If the member would like to forward me any specific details on the cases that have been raised, I'd be happy to look at those. What has been reported to me is both the efficient working of the contact centre, obviously a large number of calls at the beginnings of the census operations, but since their waiting times have reduced significantly, and people who require paper copies of the questionnaire have been receiving them.
Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. On census data, constituents have contacted me unsure what is meant by Scots on the question of how and when they use Scots. Now, the corporate body includes Doric, Lowlands, also Glaswegian, Shetland, Orcadian and so on. Does the Cabinet Secretary share my concerns that data may not be accurate, as people believe wrongly they do not actually use Scots?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I say to Christine Graham and to any member in the chamber that if they have constituents who are uncertain about any of the questions that are being posed to them, please could they draw their attention to the fact that there is very extensive guidance on the website of Scotland Census, and there's also a free phone helpline, the number I've given already, 0800 030 8308. So if people have questions about this or anything else, please would they raise them directly and receive the guidance that they will require to help them answer the census to their satisfaction.
Question number 2, John Mason.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what action it can take to demonstrate the viability of apprentice programmes as an alternative to university education, in light of an UCAS report published in 2021 reportedly showing that young people are advised against apprenticeships.
Minister Jamie Hepburn.
In Scotland, we have committed to maximising apprenticeship opportunities as a key way for employers to invest in their workforce, providing the skills the economy needs now and in the future. We recognise that apprenticeships are demand-led, and it is critical that we promote the benefits of undertaking apprenticeships as a key way for individuals to learn while they earn, and for employers to ensure their workforce has the skills needed now and into the future. Skills Development Scotland's all-age career service and our developing young workforce school coordinators, as well as events like Scottish Apprenticeship Week, are ensuring young people are aware of all the options they have and are supported to make an informed choice about their post-school destination.
John Mason.
I thank the Minister for that answer. I just wonder if he would accept that some schools appear to over-emphasise university, and while university is a tremendous achievement for many young people, for others apprenticeships are the right way forward.
Minister.
Well, fundamentally the answer is yes. I would refer back to Mr Mason's question, though, in terms of the concerns arising out of the UCAS reports. I would say those reports didn't actually cover the perspective, the position here in Scotland. I perceive there to be a change in schools. I think schools are doing more to promote apprenticeships as a good destination for young people. But of course we need to continue to do more in that regard, and through the array of activity we are undertaking through developing young workforce, we will continue to promote apprenticeships as a very good option for all young people.
Han Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Meeting with apprenticeship providers, I have heard that SMEs need to be upskilling, but for micro SMEs, accessing the funding available can be difficult. They don't have the time or resources to look at funding or complete applications, and the red tape is resulting in fewer people being taken on. What action will the Scottish Government take to simplify the process to take on apprentices or upskill current staff?
Minister.
Well, in terms of the suggestion that fewer apprentices have been taken on, that's not the case. We see the last set of statistics show that there are 1.8 times the number of MA starts at the same time last year, nearly twice the number. So I think it's important we place that on the record. But I do recognise it's incumbent on us to hear that feedback. My clear position, I've discussed this with Skills Development Scotland before, is that they continuously look at the process for applying for support, and where improvements are needed, that's what I expect them to undertake.
Stephanie Callaghan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I appreciate the Minister's answers so far. Can he comment more widely on any Scottish Government plans to strengthen the partnership working between secondary schools, businesses and colleges, particularly on trade apprenticeships, to ensure that young people are getting a chance to get a taster of this and make fully informed career choices?
Can the Minister comment widely and briefly?
Well, I will certainly do my level best to square that circle, Presiding Officer. I agree that there is a need to make sure that we improve the experience of young people in relation to work-based learning. Fundamentally, that's what our Developing Young Workforce initiative is all about. It is making progress and it will continue to do that.
Thank you. Question number 3, Colin Smyth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the current levels of unmet need and staff vacancies in social care.
Minister Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is aware that there are significant pressures facing the social care sector at present, including high levels of unmet need, and the situation is under constant review. We recognise that levels of unavailable staff due to absence and vacancies are key challenges in addressing unmet need. The cross-sectoral adult social care Gold Group meets fortnightly, providing strategic national oversight on system pressures and resilience alongside key partners. The Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care and I have recently restarted fortnightly meetings with reps from local areas facing the most acute social care pressures, with discussion focused on reducing system pressures. A series of lessons learned events are being planned with health and social care partnerships to explore learning and sharing of best practice in responding to recent system pressures, with the first event scheduled on 25th of March 2022. And in October of last year, in response to the anticipated system pressures, the Scottish Government announced £300 million in winter pressures funding to increase social care capacity.
Colin Smyth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Minister didn't actually say what the current assessed level of vacancies is, but I can tell him in Dumfries and Galloway there are over 100 vacancies, 3,000 hours of unmet need at the moment, and that's causing significant levels of delayed discharge. Surely the Minister will accept that several months after the Government announced what level of pay there was going to be for carers, it's clearly not working to fill these vacancies, and unless the Government increase that pay rise, then we are going to continue to have this crisis of unmet need and a huge level of vacancies.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, we're well aware of vacancies, and we have done a lot to ensure that we get more folk into social care and retain staff that we have. And over the piece, in terms of health and social care, we've got 1,000 additional folk in post in recent times. The Scottish Government are fully committed to the principles of fair work, and that's why we announced the 2 recent pay rises that we did. And we pay more here than in Wales, which is Labour-run, and south of the border too. We know there's more to do. That's why we're committed to national pay bargaining in our National Care Service proposals, but we will do more before then in partnership with COSLA and others.
Thank you. Question number 4, Colin Beattie.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the consultation on a draft national plan to end the need for food banks.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
No one should have to rely on charitable food provision, which is why we're developing a national plan to end the need for food banks. There's been over 400 responses to our consultation, and they will now be independently analysed and inform our final national plan. My aim is that this plan will further progress our human rights approach and strengthen our cash-first response. There are early indications that this approach is making a difference, with the Trussell Trust reporting a marked reduction in the number of emergency food bank parcels in Scotland between April and September 2021 compared to 2019.
Colin Beattie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her response. I welcome the announcement from the Scottish Government that they plan to increase 8 Scottish social security benefits by 6% from 1st April. I hope this will help support my constituents who have been impacted by UK Government welfare cuts. Does the Cabinet Secretary, however, share my concerns about the growing demand for food banks and the impact UK Government welfare cuts have had on the most vulnerable in our society?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I do, and that's why I'm committed to publishing a plan that will use the powers we have to make food banks the last port of call. And we've been doing all we can to mitigate the impact, and last year invested over £2.5 billion to support low-income households. But we do that with one hand tied. The member referred to benefit cuts, and we know, of course, the devastating cut to universal credit was the biggest overnight cut to benefits since the welfare state was established. And yesterday's statement from the Chancellor was a missed opportunity that completely failed to help those in need, as evidenced by the devastating analysis carried out by the Resolution Foundation and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation.
Question number 5, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it's had with the UK Government regarding matching Ukrainian refugees with households in Scotland that have registered under the Homes for Ukraine scheme.
Minister Neil Gray.
Thank you, President Officer. We continue to work closely with the UK Government on the design and operation of the Homes for Ukraine scheme. We're focused on ensuring a smooth and early flow of data to support the operation of the Scottish Government's Super Sponsors programme and meet our objectives for a warm and well-delivered welcome for all those who arrive in Scotland. And I met with Lord Richard Harrington to emphasise that need just yesterday.
Liam MacArthur.
Can I thank the Minister for that response and also for his engagement on some of the issues that have arisen at a local level in Orkney over recent weeks. But while 150,000, myself included, have signed up to the Homes for Ukraine scheme, so far only around 12,000 Ukrainian refugees have been given permission to come to the UK. As the barbaric shelling of cities like Mariupol continues, an estimated 10 million Ukrainians have already fled their homes. So can the Minister confirm when he expects the matching of refugees to individual households in Scotland to begin? And can he also say what further support is being provided to local councils to ensure they can meet the needs of those arriving from Ukraine?
Minister.
I thank Liam MacArthur for that question. Obviously, we're still reliant on the UK Government's immigration system to work at pace to get through the visa applications and to ensure that that data then comes to the Scottish Government. We are maintaining the pressure on the UK Government to ensure that that happens at pace, given everything that he has said in terms of the situation on the ground. In terms of support for local authorities, we've provided over £13 million of support that is going to be distributed to local authorities to acknowledge the work that is going to be required from them, and that's over and above the £10,500 commitment to local authorities that will be coming from the UK Government per person arriving from Ukraine.
Question number 6, Liam Kerr.
You asked the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what assessment it has made of GP numbers and surgery provision in the North East.
Cabinet Secretary Hamza Youssef.
And health and social care partnerships are responsible for assessing the needs of their patients and ensuring that GPs are contracted or otherwise engaged to meet those needs. The Scottish Government funds GP practices in the North East and elsewhere, of course, based on their estimated share of overall national workload.
Liam Kerr.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but look, last week the people of Aberdeen learned that the Great Western Doctors' Surgery with 10,000 patients might have to take drastic measures due to a lack of GPs in the North East. Now, when I asked about similar situations at Carden, I got weasel words and fudge. Combined with Great Western, there could be 18,500 patients affected here. So, Cabinet Secretary, the people of the North East don't want your standard pivot to what's happening in England or how many GPs there are in the Central Belt. They want a clear answer. What is he doing to increase the number of GPs in Aberdeen and the North East? And in what year does he project that there will be enough?
Cabinet Secretary.
There's a lot happening in Scotland and particularly in the North East. For example, we have the Rediscover the Joy programme, which has been piloted in 4 rural health boards in the north of Scotland. It's been expanded actually also to Tayside as well. On top of that, of course, we have the Golden Hello scheme where there are shortages of GPs. And he says he doesn't want me to pivot, but of course he can't hide away from the fact that this government has a commitment to increase GP numbers by 2027 by 800. And we're 4 years into that commitment and we've increased GP numbers by over 250. On top of that, of course, in Scotland we do have more GPs. You might not want to hear it, but we do have more GPs than the rest of the UK. In Scotland we have, he might not want to hear it, Presiding Officer, but he should listen, that in Scotland we have 94 GPs per 100,000. Where his party is in charge in England, of course, that number is 76 per 100,000.
Brief supplementary, Mercedes Vialba.
Thank you. One of the key reasons used to justify the tendering of Old Aberdeen medical practice was to improve the sustainability of GP services in the city. Yet many of the city's practices are now facing closure and unsustainable GP to patient ratios, which poses a threat to patient care. Last time I asked the Cabinet Secretary to meet with those affected. He said he would consider it, but when I followed up with him, I was told he didn't have time. 3 months have passed, so I'm asking the Cabinet Secretary again, will he meet with staff and patients to hear their concerns?
Briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course I would consider meeting Mercedes Vialba. But what I would say is, of course, last time she raised this issue with me, I did give her the details of the Health and Social Care Partnership where these issues are being taken forward. And actually, when I looked at the Old Aberdeen medical practice, which was raised a moment ago, my understanding, certainly from my conversations with the board are that more skills and more resources are now available to the practice, and that is, of course, good for the patients of Old Aberdeen medical practice. But, of course, given the pressures on my diary at that time, I said to Mercedes Villas-Alba, and I say again, when, of course, the diary allows, I'd be more than happy to meet with her and, indeed, to meet campaigners too.
Thank you. Question number 7, Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it's making the streets safer for women and girls.
Minister Ash Regan.
The Scottish Government is taking a broad range of actions to ensure that women and girls are and feel safe within our communities. We are improving our laws, we are investing in policing, and we've proposed new national planning policy embedding human rights and equality in decision-making to deliver better places for everyone. And our public health approach to reducing violence, including the Equally Safe strategy, continues to have a decisive focus on preventing violence and tackling the underlying attitudes that perpetuate it. And our new 2-year Delivering Equally Safe Fund will award £38 million to projects which focus on early intervention and prevention.
Gillian Martin.
Thank the Minister for that answer. I'm particularly interested to ask about the excellent Don't Be That Guy video campaign and how it's been rolled out to get to the target audience, I imagine, of young men. I'd like to know future plans for any other campaigns and materials, and specifically how we're assisting those who work with our young people with materials that can help them tackle male behaviours that intimidate women and girls and ultimately put them at risk.
Minister.
So, Police Scotland recently launched the Don't Be That Guy public awareness campaign, asking men to challenge their own and, I think, importantly, each other's behaviours and attitudes towards women. And I think this was an important message for Scottish society, including for policing as individuals and as a service. The campaign has generated a lot of interest. It seemed to be very well received, and it will be good in time to see its impact. Police Scotland have advised me that over 6 million people worldwide have seen the That Guy film, and over 80,000 people have visited the website. And government organisations and police services across the UK and beyond are changing the focus of their public communication on sexual violence to align with the That Guy strategy. Police Scotland are developing a number of public campaigns for the forthcoming year, targeting men and under the That Guy banner related to different aspects of men's violence.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. And before we move on to the next item of business, I invite members to join me in welcoming to the gallery Liesbeth Homans, Speaker of the Flemish Parliament. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Could I begin by echoing the comments that we heard in this chamber earlier this week following the sad and untimely passing of our friend and Scottish Conservative colleague, David Hill. David died playing the sport he loved for the Parliament team that he helped to set up. And I know, having spoken to his parents, Roger and Sharon, in the last couple of days, they are understandably, utterly devastated and heartbroken, but they are so appreciative of the support they've received from parties across this chamber. And also thank you to you, Presiding Officer, and the Scottish Parliament team, who have not only helped David's family, but also his friends and colleagues that were with him when this tragic accident occurred. So thank you. Presiding Officer, yesterday the damning Audit Scotland report was published into this SNP government's failure to build 2 lifeline ferries. Kate Forbes was put forward to respond in this chamber and to the media, but couldn't say who made the key decision to sign off this disastrous contract. So, First Minister, can you give a straight answer where your Finance Secretary could not? Which minister gave the green light for these ferry contracts against expert advice?
First Minister.
Firstly, Presiding Officer, can I also take the opportunity to express my shock and distress at the untimely and tragic passing of David Hill. I think it is a mark of the man that David was that he had such good friends right across the political spectrum.
in this Parliament. Obviously, when he died, he was doing what he loved most. I hope in time that will be some comfort to his loved ones. I had contact personally with David's dad on Sunday and obviously offered all possible help that the Scottish Government can provide. But my thoughts are with Roger, with Sharon and with David's wider family and friends, and of course all of his colleagues on the Conservative benches. Presiding Officer, to turn to the substance of the question, before I come directly to that question, let me say very candidly, the problems with the procurement, or rather the construction, because it's not the procurement, the construction of these ferries, which resulted in delay, cost overruns and an impact, a very negative impact on island communities, is far from satisfactory, and I think that is putting it mildly. The report that was published by Audit Scotland yesterday is entirely fair and justified. There are a number of complexities, but these are public contracts and therefore, of course, the buck stops with the Scottish Government. Pre-2019, these were issues around the quality of work and progress of work when the yard was in private ownership. Of course, since the nationalisation of the yard at the end of 2019, further problems have been identified, the cabling problem being the most significant. And of course, there was additional delay because of COVID. But we remain focused on the delivery of the ferries. And of course, the actions that the Scottish Government have taken have helped to secure jobs, the last remaining commercial shipbuilder on the Clyde, and I think that is important. Turning to the specific question briefly, Presiding Officer, who was Transport Minister at the time in question is of course a matter of public record. That was Derek Mackay. But of course, this is a government, and this may be alien to the Conservatives, I understand, but this is a government that operates by collective responsibility. And ultimately, as with any decisions, whether I am personally involved in them or not, responsibility stops with me. And in terms of the documents around that particular decision, many of these documents have been in the public domain for some time. They clearly narrate the issues with the lack of a full refund guarantee, but they also clearly narrate the mitigations that were put in place to reduce that risk. Now, these are documents that are in the public domain and available for anybody to review.
Douglas Ross.
The Finance Secretary couldn't tell this Parliament or the media asking yesterday who was to blame, but 24 hours later, the SNP's spin machine has spun into action, and it's the fault of the disgraced ex-Finance Minister. So let me get this absolutely straight. The First Minister is claiming she had no involvement. The Audit Scotland report confirms that SNP ministers were aware of the huge risk with this project, but carried on regardless. The government she leads, willingly decided to charge ahead against expert advice. The First Minister is now trying to blame Derek Mackay, and it all just seems very convenient that the person getting the blame is no longer here. It was the First Minister's government, her cabinet, her decision. So let me ask again. So let me ask again. While she is saying the Transport Minister took the decision, what input to that decision did the First Minister have through the government she leads?
First Minister.
I'm genuinely not sure if Douglas Ross listened to a single word that I said. It was him who asked who the individual minister was. I did not volunteer that information. It is a matter of public record who the Transport Minister was at the time of that decision. It is a matter of public record that that was Derek Mackay. But here's the bit, of course, that I know doesn't suit the script that Douglas Ross prepared before he came into the chamber, but here's what I went on to say, and I'm going to repeat it again just to be absolutely clear. This is a government that operates by collective responsibility, and I am responsible ultimately for all decisions that the government takes. The buck stops with me. I have never tried to shy away from that on any issue. I know that's not how things are done in the Conservative government at Westminster, but that is how things are done here. So perhaps Douglas Ross might want to reflect before his next question on what I'm actually saying here. I am ultimately responsible for all decisions of the Scottish Government. That's why, of course, I am standing here asking the questions. But on the substance of this issue. And as I said, the documents are available in the public domain, and the issues around, in particular, because this was a concern that CMAL had expressed about the lack of a full refund guarantee. Those concerns are set out in these documents, but so too are the actions that were taken to mitigate these risks. And of course, government then comes to a decision on the balance of risk. And of course, the documents express the view that the current deal that has been negotiated with FML is the best deal that can be achieved given the financial restrictions the Yard is operating under. So there were 3 key changes made, and actually this is all set out in the Audit Scotland report: an increase in the final payment so that more money was being withheld, that CMAL would take ownership of all equipment, machinery, materials as they arrived at the shipyard, and FML would require all major suppliers to offer a full refund guarantee. These are the changes that reduced the risk and of course underpinned the decision that the government arrived at. But I come back to the central point here. I am not defending the cost overruns, the delay around the construction of these ferries. It is completely unacceptable. But at all points, the motivation of this government has been to save jobs, save the shipyard and make sure that these ferries, albeit late, and that is a matter of deep regret, can be delivered. And that's what we continue to focus on.
Douglas Ross. The First Minister says she takes ultimate responsibility, then throws an ex-minister, a disgraced SNP ex-minister, under the bus. So if we are looking at ultimate responsibility from the First Minister, can she tell us why a key safeguard was removed that could have saved Scottish taxpayers hundreds of millions of pounds? Can she tell us, with her ultimate responsibility, why they started building the ferries when they didn't even have a design agreed? With her ultimate responsibility, can she tell us why Ferguson Marine were given the contract in the first place? And with her ultimate responsibility, can she tell us why there is not going to be a public inquiry into this whole scandal? Because we need this public inquiry, because Audit Scotland tried to get answers, but they couldn't. They said, and I quote, "There is no documented evidence to confirm why Scottish Government ministers were willing to accept the risk of awarding a contract to Ferguson Marine despite CMAL's concerns. We consider that there should have been a proper record of this important decision." First Minister, this is one of the most reckless decisions ever taken by a Scottish Government so far, costing £250 million of taxpayers' money. First Minister, why can't the body in Scotland charged with scrutinising public spending get a shred of evidence to justify your government's decision?
First Minister. Who had read Audit Scotland's report could reach that particular conclusion, but I'll come back to that. But can I say this first of all? If Douglas Ross thinks it is unimportant who the individual minister was, and that, as I agree with, the buck stops with me, why was his first question asking me who the individual minister was? Clearly, he must have thought that was important. I was not intending to come here and do anything other than accept full responsibility. Coming on to the questions, and let me answer them one by one. So, on the decision to proceed and the lack of the full builder's refund guarantee, that's what I've already run through. That decision was clearly taken on the balance of risk. CMAL had concerns about that, but a range of actions had been taken, and I set out exactly what those actions were to mitigate those risks. And the conclusion, and this is in documentation that is publicly available, that the deal negotiated was the best one that could have been achieved in those circumstances. Now, the second question I think that Douglas Ross asked me was why was the contract awarded to FML when it was the most expensive? Again, that question is actually answered in the Audit Scotland report. The review, of course, found that it was the most expensive. I think, if memory serves me correctly, that was known at the time. But CMAL also assessed the bid as being of the highest quality. So overall, it achieved the highest combined cost and quality score of the 7 bids. That was the decision taken at the time. And of course, ministers are not involved in procurement decisions. And lastly, Presiding Officer, on the question of a public inquiry, we of course have had a parliamentary committee look into this issue. We've now had a major Audit Scotland review, but as Audit Scotland itself recommends at page 7, I think, on completion of the vessels, there should be a formal review of what went wrong with a view to learning lessons. So the Scottish Government will consider what form that further review should take. We will consider that carefully and, of course, we will report to Parliament in due course.
Douglas Ross.
It's ridiculous. We are fortunate in Scotland to have two governments, and there's only one of them currently building ships in Scotland that actually sail. And that is because of this First Minister's record in government. So let's look again. Ferguson Marine was the most expensive bidder, yet, as the First Minister has just said, was chosen on the basis of quality. Chosen on the basis of quality when ferries are 2.5 times over budget. Hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money has already been wasted. There is a 5-year delay at least, and there's still 175 faults with the ferries that are still being built. This is one of the worst public spending disasters since devolution. And who messed up? Who knows in SNP Seeks It Scotland? Because all the evidence is gone. Audit Scotland couldn't get to the bottom of a number of points. The only scraps of paper we have left about this disastrous decision are the old SNP press releases that claimed they were saving Scottish shipbuilding. So, First Minister, can I ask, when you visited the ferries in 2016, were the painted-on windows not a sign that your decision was an absolute shocker?
First Minister.
Well, I think what Douglas Ross has demonstrated there is that he has not spent much time actually reading the hundreds of pages of documents that are in the public domain. There is one issue where Audit Scotland refers to a lack of documentation. I think that is a matter that the Government needs to reflect on seriously and will. But there are hundreds of pages of documents. I've referred to many of them already, and they would bear some attention, I think, from Douglas Ross. I said candidly at the outset, I think this is a deeply regrettable situation. At the time I visited the yard, of course, it was in private ownership. Assurances were given there about the completion of work, and the problems that have led to cost overruns, delays and, worst of all, a negative impact on our island communities is deeply regrettable. At every step, the motivation of the Government has been to secure employment, to secure the shipyard and to get these ferries completed, and that is what we will continue to focus on. We will learn the lessons in the Audit Scotland report. We will make sure that all of the recommendations in it are taken forward. But Douglas Ross may think it is unimportant to have saved 300 jobs and a shipyard. I actually think these things matter, and that is why we will now focus on making sure that that yard has a positive future.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, can I start, like others have, by paying tribute to David Hill and send my particular condolences, of course, to his family and friends, but also recognise the wonderful tribute that Jamie Green, who employed and paid to David, and my condolences to Jamie Green, and in particular all our Conservative colleagues in this Parliament. David was someone that was respected across the political spectrum, and he had friends not just that were MSPs, but let's not forget the many staff that work in and around this Parliament building too. Presiding Officer, yesterday, faced with the biggest fall in living standards since rationing, the Chancellor failed to present a spring statement that would make life easier for millions of families. He failed to introduce a windfall tax, he failed to put more money in people's pockets, and he raised the tax burden on millions of families across the UK. He must have been taking lessons on missed opportunities from this First Minister. In her government's budget, the First Minister had the opportunity to tackle the cost of living crisis, but just like the Tories, they failed. Giving households less than £4 a week in a council tax rebate, copying Rishi Sunak's policy, just won't cut it. Will the First Minister accept that the action she has taken so far is not enough to confront this crisis?
First Minister.
Well, in the Scottish Government's budget, of course, we doubled the Scottish child payment, game-changing for families with children living in poverty. If memory serves me correctly, Presiding Officer, the Labour Party shamefully voted against that measure in the Scottish budget. In terms of yesterday's spring statement, I think it showed a callous disregard for the misery that people are already facing and the misery that is going only to get much worse. Household incomes are about to suffer their biggest fall in more than 60 years. The Resolution Foundation has estimated that an additional 1.3 million people across the UK, including 500,000 children, will be pushed into poverty. There was nothing to help the poor and those on the lowest incomes, and I think it was shameful. I think the most shameful thing about the Chancellor's announcements yesterday is that he squirreled away money for pre-election bribes, money that could be spent right now to help those in desperate circumstances. His actions yesterday in that regard were disgusting. In terms of the Scottish Government's actions, and we have limited powers and we have limited resources, but due to our wider, long-standing policies, people here already pay less on average in council tax, less in water bills, less in rail fares. Of course, people in Scotland, compared to south of the border, pay nothing for prescriptions, for eye tests, for university tuition. Additional action, in addition to the payment through the council tax, the £150 payment, we have taken the decision to uprate devolved benefits by 6%, and it's the failure south of the border to do that that's having the biggest impact on low-income families. We've introduced, as I've already said, the Scottish Child Payment. We're investing in the Scottish Welfare Fund. We're increasing the Fuel Insecurity Fund. So we will continue to do everything that we possibly can within our powers and resources. But anybody who is serious about helping the lowest paid would be arguing for demanding powers and resources to be taken out of the hands of Rishi Sunak and his type and put into the hands of this Parliament.
Anna Sarwar.
We welcome the doubling of the Scottish Child Payment, but it's a plan that predates the cost of living crisis. Over 270,000 children aren't going to benefit, and poverty campaigners say it needs to go further. And the First Minister wants to obsess about power she doesn't have. She's been in government for 15 years. She has power. Use that power to change people's lives. That's what the job is for. So let's look at what she's done with the power she has. Copied Rishi Sunak's council tax rebate, failed to target support to those most in need, increased rail fares and put up water charges for Scottish households. We have published detailed plans on how to confront this crisis, but so far the SNP has not listened. So here's another meaningful action they could take. Scottish Water is owned by the Scottish Government. They are currently sitting on a cash mountain of £428 million. So Scottish Labour is calling for not just the freezing of water charges, but a £100 rebate for every household in Scotland. Does the First Minister believe that this money is better off in Scottish Water's bank account or in struggling families' accounts?
First Minister.
Consider everything that we can reasonably do to help. But Anna Sarwar said that the Scottish Child Payment doubling, of course, predated the cost of living crisis. That is, of course, one of the reasons why this afternoon, this very day in this Parliament, Shona Robison will deliver a statement accompanying our updated Tackling Child Poverty delivery plan, setting out the further actions that this government is going to take to lift children out of poverty, rather than doing as the UK government is doing, pushing more children into poverty. I'm surprised that Anna Sarwar didn't seem to know that. Yes, my party's been in government for some time. That's why in Scotland, people don't pay for prescriptions, they don't pay for eye tests, they don't pay to go to university. It's why we've got lower council tax on average than in England and in Labour-run Wales. It's why more people pay no council tax at all, because we retained the council tax reduction scheme. And of course, we are using our powers. The doubling of the Scottish Child Payment is the principal example of that. So we will continue to look at what more we can do. Anna Sarwar is right to continue to press us to do more, but he'd have more credibility if he didn't also back the retention of these powers over welfare, over public spending, in the hands of Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. Until he changes that position, I don't know that many people across Scotland are going to take him seriously.
Anna Sarwar. Presiding Officer, that is simply not good enough. People are struggling right now, and as per usual, the First Minister wants to make this a constitutional debate. I hate to break it to her. See, whether you voted yes or no, your bills are still going up, and you need help from this government. So the First Minister can take action to tackle the cost of living crisis. And let's look at the stories over the last week, the tragic stories from across the country. People stealing fuel canisters in the Highlands. Families turning down fresh vegetables from food banks because they can't afford to turn on the gas cooker. and people digging up their gardens to grow their own food because they can't afford to buy it. That's why Labour has set out the actions both governments should take. A windfall tax on oil and gas giants to reduce bills by £600, the £200 as a grant, not a loan, and here in Scotland a £400 support payment to support struggling families, a £100 rebate on water bills and a freeze on water charges and rail fares. That is real help, supporting families with over £1,000, a contrast to this government's flagship cost of living policy, which would give families less than £4 a week. When will the First Minister understand she has to do better than this?
First Minister.
Flagship policy is the Scottish Child Payment, which Anna Sarwar and his colleagues, of course, voted against when the budget came before this Parliament. We will continue to look at everything and anything we can do within the powers and resources that we have. Shona Robertson will set out further actions when she delivers her statement this afternoon. There is real misery. There is a wave of human misery being experienced right now. It's only going to get worse. On that, Anna Sarwar and I do not disagree, and we will continue to do everything we can. But I'm afraid there is a real issue at the heart of this. If you look at the Joseph Roundy Foundation analysis published this morning, those in the lowest income decile are going to see their household incomes cut by almost 6%. The main reason for that is the failure to uprate benefits by more than 3.1%. Where we have control of benefits here, we've uprated them by 6%. Now, the reason we can't do that for the main benefits, like universal credit, for example, is because we do not have the power. And I'm afraid, and it's the same reason why we cannot impose a windfall tax to help with energy costs. It's the same reason why energy costs may remain reserved. Because when it came to a choice between yes and no, Anna Sarwar encouraged people to vote no, and because people voted no, these powers remain in the hands of Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. And until Anna Sarwar addresses that issue, then we are always going to be limited in this Parliament in terms of what we can do. When is he going to wake up and realise that?
Now move to supplementaries, and I call Marie McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. A constituent of mine is a victim of historic forced adoption, whose concerns about confidentiality of victims responding to the Scottish Government consultation. She explains that filling in the responses is quite difficult for victims, as it brings up a lot of emotion and it has a bigger impact on people filling it in. This could have a significant impact on the responses given and the effectiveness of the consultation. What assurances can the First Minister give my constituent and all victims of forced adoption that any information they give will be confidential and that they will not be identifiable from their responses?
First Minister.
This is a really important issue. I also recognise it's an extremely sensitive issue, so I want to thank everybody who has responded to the consultation so far, and I appreciate that it takes a lot of courage to share deeply distressing stories like this. We are offering a private space for people to come forward to share experiences in complete confidentiality. And I would like to reassure the member's constituent that participants can take part entirely anonymously and no data that could identify an individual will be retained. We also have a dedicated helpline in collaboration with Health in Mind to provide interim support to individuals who want to make a contribution. The closing date for responses is the 20th of April, and following this date, all responses will be analysed and considered along with any other available evidence.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Over the past decade, no fewer than 4 women have died whilst patients on the Morden ward at Murray Royal Hospital in Perth while suffering acute mental health disorders. Today, the Courier newspaper reports that a 5th patient died on the ward in the same period, but their death and the circumstances have never been made public. First Minister, these patients were in hospital to keep them free from harm, but they and their families have been failed. Why is this happening, and what is being done to stop it?
First Minister.
These are very serious issues, and where lessons need to be learned, they are learned by health boards and, where necessary, by the Government. I am not aware of the detail of the case reported in the Courier today. I will ensure that I become aware of that detail, and I'm happy to write to Murdo Fraser when I have had the opportunity to do so.
Jackie Bailey.
Presiding Officer, Hourglass is a 24/7 helpline supporting older people and their families dealing with abuse and neglect. This is the first service of its kind that has just launched in Scotland as a result of a 46% rise in elder abuse calls during the pandemic. Elder abuse is an under-supported and underreported area, and given these shocking statistics, the Hourglass helpline will be a very welcome resource. Hourglass is funded by the Home Office to provide a service in England. Will the First Minister agree to meet Hourglass and consider providing support for this valuable service in Scotland?
First Minister.
Services like Hourglass are very important. Elder abuse is awful, and of course the pressures of the pandemic I think are understood by all of us. I'm certainly very happy to have the Health Secretary meet with or talk to Hourglass to see what the Scottish Government can do to support them.
Bob Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My constituents' family have thankfully safely made it to Glasgow from Kyiv, including a 68-year-old relative travelling on a Ukrainian passport. They have asked me whether their relative will qualify for the concessionary travel scheme, something that I hope the First Minister can confirm. But more widely, First Minister, what steps is the Scottish Government taking to assist those arriving in Scotland from Ukraine or indeed elsewhere to access all the services and entitlements they should have the right to receive at such a difficult time?
First Minister.
Well, I'm certainly very relieved and pleased to hear that Bob Doris's constituents' family have made it safely to Glasgow. I know they will receive a warm welcome here. I'd be happy to provide any detailed information on the support services that are available given their particular circumstances. Obviously, we have a proud history of welcoming displaced people and a wealth of experience from previous schemes. We are working with a range of partners to ensure that wraparound support is in place for all displaced people that are arriving here in Scotland. Those who come from Ukraine will have a right to work, they will have access to social security benefits and public funds, and we will be working to make sure people are aware of that and get access to all of those services. We are standing ready to welcome, I hope, significant numbers of people fleeing the situation in Ukraine. We were pleased that our super sponsor scheme that we had proposed to the UK Government went live on Friday, and we have multi-agency efforts in place to provide support. What we need now is to see visas begin to be granted in significant numbers so that we can get more people to Scotland and give them the support that they need. And on this issue, finally, let me take the opportunity to welcome, I'm sure on behalf of all of us, the Dnipro kids who arrived in Scotland last night. I know they would all rather be at home in Ukraine, but while they're here, I think it's something all of us want to do to make sure that they are surrounded by love, care and support.
Megan Gallagher. Can I just check, Ms Gallagher, is your card in? Okay. Just bear with us a second. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I refer members to my register of interests, as I am a serving councillor in North Lanarkshire. On the 24th of February, the First Minister gave a commitment to explore Christine Graham's suggestion that local authorities should not investigate their own complaints in cases relating to child protection. Therefore, does the First Minister agree that an independent national whistleblowing officer should be established for public bodies, and does she agree that those who cover up child protection issues should be reported to Police Scotland immediately?
First Minister.
I did give the commitment to Christine Graham, as the member rightly says. That was just a few weeks ago, so I hope she will accept that the consideration of these issues is still underway, and I will make sure, as part of that consideration, the proposals she's made today are properly considered.
Question number 3, Pam Gossel.
Presiding Officer, to ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government is doing to ensure that perpetrators of domestic abuse do not go on to re-offend.
First Minister.
Domestic abuse is an insidious and dreadful crime. It has a devastating impact on victims, and it is vital that perpetrators are fully held to account. In partnership with key stakeholders, we are implementing Equally Safe, which is Scotland's strategy to tackle all forms of violence against women and girls. This aims to prevent violence from occurring in the first place, build the capability and capacity of mainstream and specialist services to support survivors and those at risk, and also strengthen the justice response to victims and perpetrators. As a tangible example of that, we have committed to expanding the availability of the accredited Caledonian system to ensure that more male perpetrators of domestic abuse are directed to services that help challenge harmful behaviours, reduce re-offending and improve the lives of women and children.
Pam Gossel.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Growing up as a very young child, I watched victims of domestic abuse come to my mum's shop on Argyll Street for help. But not enough has changed. Half of the 65,000 domestic violence incidents reported in 2020 to 21 were committed by reoffenders. Clearly, whatever the government is doing right now isn't working. We need to work together to provide a true deterrent for the horrible abuse. So can I ask the First Minister, will her government commit to do more on this issue and back my proposals to create a domestic abuse register?
First Minister.
I mean, these are really serious issues, and I want to ensure that we take them very seriously. On the specific issue of an offender register, obviously we keep the law under continual review. We're always keen and willing to explore any options to reduce crime and reoffending, so we would be very keen to understand the detail of that proposal and give it due consideration. Of course, all registered sex offenders are already placed on the sex offender register and as such must register with the police as part of those requirements, but I appreciate that will not incorporate all perpetrators of domestic violence. So these things need careful consideration, and I certainly undertake to give it that. On the broader issues, it is definitely the case, and I think this is something that should be welcomed, that more people now feel able to come forward when they are victims of domestic abuse or sexual violence, and that is to be encouraged. Obviously, sentences for perpetrators are matters for courts, and I think it's important that we all recognise that. But there is a range of work underway to ensure better support for victims, to ensure that those who do commit these dreadful crimes do face up to the consequences of their actions, and the Caledonian system that I referred to earlier is an important part of that. We're also doing more to invest in the support services that victims need and get so much benefit from. So there's a range of work underway, but on this issue the government will remain open-minded to any further proposals that are put forward.
Question number 4, Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what work is being done to extend the warm Scots welcome to Ukrainians arriving in the UK.
First Minister.
Well, we're all continue to be horrified by the illegal war in Ukraine. We are ready to extend the warmest of Scottish welcomes to those fleeing the war. We've been working rapidly with a range of partners to ensure that displaced Ukrainians arrive to a place of safety and security. We've established welcome hubs at key entry points to support people with what they need immediately on arrival, as well as to assess their medium to longer term needs. We're working with COSLA to provide accommodation, as well as exploring all viable public and private sector housing options, and of course offers from the public who have generously offered to open their own homes.
Fulton McGregor.
I thank the First Minister for that response and for the ongoing work of the Scottish Government in this area. And I would also like to take this opportunity briefly, Presiding Officer, to congratulate my good friend and colleague Neil Gray on his recent appointment as Minister for Ukrainian Refugees. I think that this is also a very fitting appointment because, of course, our two constituencies have a richly shared history making up the wider Monklands area, and we've both been deeply touched over recent weeks by the sheer magnitude of response of people in both Coatbridge and Christton and Airdrie Shotts to this crisis, and their tremendous willingness to support those seeking refuge. Can I therefore ask the First Minister, after the stress and trauma of escaping an illegal war, how will the Scottish Government ensure that the welcome hubs that she mentioned support displaced people from Ukraine to find peace and safety here in Scotland?
First Minister.
The welcome hubs are a really important initial part of what we want to offer. So they will assess immediate needs, they will take a multi-agency approach, assess those needs, provide wraparound support, and that will include having trained staff on call to support people who are experiencing trauma. The welcome hubs will also be able to begin the assessment of longer-term needs, including, of course, accommodation requirements. We now have the super-sponsor route in place, which is in addition to the Homes for Ukraine route and, of course, the family route. We have the support ready to be provided here. The bit in the middle is getting the visa applications granted so that people can start arriving in numbers. I'll get an update later today, but yesterday the update I had was that there had been over 1,000 applications made through the super sponsor scheme, and just under 1,000, I think, in terms of individual matching. Obviously, we're still improving data flows, so there will be some uncertainty around those figures. What we need to see, though, is a significant speeding up of the granting of visa applications in order, as I say, that we can see people come here and start to access the support that we have ready for them on that multi-agency basis.
Question number 5, Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to ensure that people are able to register with NHS dental practice and receive NHS dental treatment in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic.
First Minister.
It is obviously a priority to ensure that patients are able to access NHS dental care. Of course, we've committed to abolishing dental charges in the lifetime of this Parliament, which will help remove at least one of the barriers to accessing high-quality NHS dental services. To support patient care and access, we recently announced revised payment arrangements for dentists from the 1st of April, which will more closely link payments to the number of patients being seen and treatments provided. This multiplier funding arrangement will see additional investment in dentistry increase by almost £17 million in the first quarter of the new financial year, and that comes on top of the 9% planned increase in the budget for NHS dental services in the coming financial year, and of course the support given during the pandemic of £50 million financial support for the sector and a further £35 million of PPE.
Faisal Chowdhury.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. Many constituents have expressed to me that due to the total lack of NHS provision in their areas, they are left with untreated dental pain and conditions, often missing checkups that can spot life-threatening conditions such as oral cancer. Does the First Minister realise that she is increasingly not even overseeing a two-tier system? For many people across Scotland, dentistry is effectively privatised already.
First Minister.
No, we continue to support NHS dentistry. In fact, we are investing more proportionately than we're seeing south of the border by about 40%. We have about 40% more dentists per head of population, per 100,000 of the population than elsewhere in the UK. There are significant challenges because of the pandemic. That is why we financially supported dentists during the pandemic and why we're taking action now to further support dentists. The payment, the multiplier funding arrangement that I referred to in my earlier answer is extremely important. It's been welcomed by many dentists. I think the BDA have also welcomed the introduction of this. So that recognises the importance of linking payments to numbers of patients and to the treatment that is being provided. So we will continue to ensure that we support NHS dentistry and that people have access to, and of course, as I also said earlier on, removing dental charges will also take away one of the barriers that traditionally some people have experienced.
Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, President Officer. As, of course, I had my own experience with dental problems last week, and I'm not directly blaming the First Minister for that. But Douglas Thane from the Scottish Dental Association said that decades of underfunding by the Scottish Government has created a toxic environment as dentists battle rising costs and inadequate fees paid by health boards. So can't the First Minister see that her current approach is endangering dental provision for those who need it most across Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, I know I said earlier on that the buck stops with me. I'm afraid that doesn't include Stephen Kerr's teeth problems. I'm just hoping the glue is working better today. But I think I'm going to move on because
Please do.
These are two important issues for such levity. These are important issues. There are more dentists. So if I look, where Stephen Kerr's party is in government, the number of dentists per 100,000 of the population was 39.9. In Scotland, it's 55.6, 40% higher. For this financial year, our government investing in core community dental services is 40% higher. That doesn't remove all of the difficulties, but it does show the foundation we have in place here, which is why the additional investment I'm speaking about is so important, because it recognises these additional problems caused by the pandemic. So we will continue to focus on supporting NHS dentists in order that people across the country can have the access to them that they have every right to expect.
Question number 6, Ariane Burgess.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the spring statement.
First Minister.
Well, yesterday's spring statement was a missed opportunity on the part of the Chancellor to give families and businesses the support they need now in the face of rising costs. It did show callous disregard for the poorest in our society. Despite the largest annual fall in living standards since the 1950s, as confirmed by the OBR, the Chancellor's decisions will mainly assist the better off and provide no real help to those on low incomes, with ever more households left facing poverty. In contrast, the Scottish Government, within our very limited powers and resources in this regard, is taking a range of targeted steps, including, of course, doubling the Scottish Child Payment, uprating our devolved social security benefits by 6% and extending our Fuel Insecurity Fund.
Ariane Burgess.
Brexit and the volatile cost of oil and gas are playing a massive role in the cost of living crisis, and there was no recognition of this Tory legacy in the Chancellor's statement. What's worse, there was nothing in his statement to help those struggling the most with the rising costs. With the Office of Budget Responsibility warning about the biggest annual fall in living standards since their records began, what can the Scottish Government do to build on what we have already delivered to tackle the cost of living, like free bus travel for young people, free school meals for primary school children, and, as you've just said, doubling the Scottish Child Payment?
First Minister.
Well, I think it is absolutely right to point out the impact of the Chancellor's statement yesterday on the poorest in our society. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation has published analysis this morning that I would recommend every member of this Parliament looks at carefully. The richest decile will see their incomes fall by less than 2%. The poorest decile will see their incomes fall by almost 6%. And that is principally down to the failure to properly uprate benefits. And given that the Chancellor had access to more money, the decision not to do that is disgusting and completely indefensible. I've already set out today the actions that the Scottish Government is taking. We will continue to look at further actions we can take. And of course, as I said earlier on, Shona Robison will set out, when she delivers the Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan later today, some further actions that the Scottish Government will take.
Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Further to the woefully inadequate spring budget from the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the face of fierce cost of living hike, does the First Minister agree that for those on fixed incomes, such as pensioners, many of whom became housebound in these COVID years, during which heating costs will be devastating, and with one of the worst UK state pensions, they've got the worst in Europe, and that Anna Sarwar, for example, has to wake up to the position that without the power over pensions and other benefits, mitigation has its limitations?
First Minister.
Well, Christine Graham is absolutely 100% right. We can't use powers that we don't hold in this Parliament. Where we do hold powers, we are using those powers. So taking action, game-changing action, to lift children out of poverty. We don't have control over pensions, but it is the case that there are people we tend to talk about the invidious choices that in these circumstances people face between eating or heating their homes. There will be some people in the face of this cost of living crisis who cannot afford to do either. That is the reality. This government will do everything we can within the powers and resources we have, but as long as so many of these levers lie with a Conservative government at Westminster, we're going to see more of what we saw in the spring statement yesterday. Anybody who really cares about this would not just be arguing for, they'd be demanding these powers to be taken away from Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson and put into the hands of this Parliament as quickly as possible.
Mercedes Vialba.
Millions of workers are facing a cost of living crisis that they didn't create. The People's Assembly have been organising mass demonstrations up and down the country to make it clear that workers can't pay and they won't pay for this crisis. And campaigners are calling for the introduction of a wealth tax on the richest 1%, which would raise £14 billion a year to help tackle the cost of living crisis and invest in public services. Does the First Minister back this call?
First Minister.
Yeah, I do think we should see those who can afford it contribute the most. But just like a windfall tax, a wealth tax is not something this government has the power to do. So if Labour want to see these things happen in Scotland, then they can't just talk about the ends they want to see. They have to actually equip this Parliament and this government with the means to do something about it. It's called making this Parliament independent.
I'll take a general supplementary from Liam MacArthur.
Thank you. The Scottish Government has informed Orkney Islands Council that the island's connectivity plan will exclude Lifeline internal ferry services in both Orkney and Shetland. Can the First Minister please explain why her National Islands plan does not appear to include the needs of all Scotland's islands?
First Minister.
We have been discussing with the island authorities for some time the inter-island ferry services. We will continue to do that, and I'll ask the Transport Minister to engage with Liam MacArthur in more detail about what further steps we're able to take.
Thank you. That concludes the First Minister's questions. There will be a short pause before members' business.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.